Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Marcus McCaskill. I have been designated as the hearing officer this evening for three items. We're going to be conducting three hearings tonight in a specific order. I'm going to run through just a couple of preliminary comments that will pertain to all three of these hearings. And then we will open up the second and third hearing on a kind of a trailing docket. So tonight, there will be three matters here before me for consideration. The first is PDP 210013. It's the come and go project located at 949 East Prospect Road and 1607 South LeMay. Properties located in the neighborhood commercial or NC zone district. That will be the first hearing. I will quickly note for the record that I have been provided with a copy of the notice that was mailed to adjacent property owners dated November 15th. I have also been provided with a copy of the notice that was published in the Fort Collins, Coloradoan on November 18th. So I do have jurisdiction to conduct that hearing. The second hearing will be PDP 210009, the Jerome Street Station project. That property is located within the Community Commercial North College Zone District, or CCN Zone District, as well as the Service Commercial CS Zone District. That project was also properly noticed by mail notice dated November 15th and notice of public hearing published in the Fort Collins, Colorado on November 18th. So I have jurisdiction to conduct that hearing as well. And finally, the third hearing will be PDP 210016, Sit and Stay Dog Bar, PDP located at 1524 North College Avenue. That property is located within the Service Commercial Zone District, or CS Zone District. This project has also been properly noticed with notice to adjacent property owners being mailed on November 15th and notice of this evening's public hearing being published in the Fort Collins, Colorado on November 18th. So I do have jurisdiction to conduct the third hearing as well. So with that, let me run through a couple of comments on, for those of you that are joining us tonight via Zoom or maybe on the telephone, let me maybe run through the process for how to provide public comment on these three projects at the appropriate time. And Katie, I don't know if you want to pull up a slide that maybe I can work from, or I can just run through some general instructions to the folks that are on the call tonight. Do you have a preference?
If you could run through them generally, that'd be great.
Okay, no problem. So if you are joining us via Zoom, you will want to sign in with your first name and last name or last initial. And then when we get to the public comment portion of each of these three hearings, we will be requesting public comment from in the order of the individuals that have signed up, and city staff will be helping me with that. You want to use the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen to let city staff know that you would like to speak, or if you are joining us this evening via telephone, please dial *9 on your phone to raise your hand. As I just mentioned, city staff will be calling on individuals and letting you know when it's your turn. And at that point, you would unmute yourself and then offer up public comments or questions for the applicant or city staff regarding the respective project. Please do state your name and address before you get going with your comments. The reason that we ask for your address is that under the city's land use code, if you are participating in these hearings tonight, you do receive a copy of the hearing officer decision that is ultimately issued in these matters due to participation. Let me also run through the order of proceedings generally that we will be following for each of these three hearings tonight. So first of all, there will be a brief introduction given by city staff that will be followed by the applicant presentation. There will then be a more thorough staff presentation regarding the project. And there will be an opportunity for staff during that presentation to respond to any issues that may have been raised in the applicant presentation. At that point, once both the applicant and city staff have finished their presentations, I will open this up for public comment. And at that point, those of you that are here, for example, to comment on the first project, which will be the Come and Go PDP application, you would then raise your hand using the Zoom function or *9 if you're joining us via telephone to basically get in the queue, right? So that we can have you participate at the appropriate time. Generally, I limit public comment to 3 minutes per individual, 5 minutes if you are representing an HOA or a commercial property owners association or another entity. And once we have finished up with all of the public comment on each of these, on each specific application, we'll then turn it back over to both the applicant and city staff to provide maybe some clarifications on certain points or to answer questions or address issues that may have been raised during a public comment. I am required under the city's land use code to issue a written decision within 10 business days of the conclusion of this evening's public hearings. And as I mentioned earlier, if you are joining us remotely and provide your address, you will be mailed a copy of the applicable decision. So with that, I think that concludes my preliminary comments. I know that I mentioned we'd be handling these in a specific order. So at this point, let's go ahead and commence with the hearing on the Come and Go project PDP 210013, and I'll hand it over to Rebecca Everett, who will be providing a brief overview.
Thank you, Mr. McCaskin. As you just said, I'll be providing an overview of the Come and Go project development plan, PDP number 210013. This project is, hold on, get my slides in front of me to advance here. This project is located at the corner of LeMay and Prospect, the southwest corner of that intersection within the neighborhood commercial or NC zone district. And you'll see on this slide that NC zone district, this is part of a broader district that extends south of this site to the east of this site across LeMay and to the north and northeast of the site across Prospect Road. The project consists of the consolidation of 4 lots or portions of lots and demolition of 3 existing buildings. The project proposed is a 4,066 square foot convenience store with retail fuel sales, so that it includes a fuel canopy with 4 fuel pumps and then an associated trash and recycling enclosure on the site as well. The project proposes 16 parking spaces, though you'll see in the staff analysis, there's a proposed recommendation of approval or condition of approval that would reduce the parking count to 15 spaces. This project was required to comply with historic preservation standards. So there's a home on one of those 4 lots that's being consolidated here that is eligible for historic designation and is not being demolished with this project proposal. And so that relationship to that building triggered a historic review and preservation of that building. There's one modification of standard or variance requested related to a requirement for spacing between convenience retail stores with fuel sales. So gas stations with convenience stores. There's a separation requirement in the code, and the applicants are requesting a modification from that standard. And as I mentioned, there are 4 recommended conditions of approval by staff. Provide a couple images of the site for a little more context. You can see here there's an existing fuel station on the site already that has existed for many years. The remainder of the site includes single family homes and existing trees. and other and related site elements that go along with those homes that exist now. The historic home that I referenced, or the home that's eligible for historic designation, is on city-owned property. The city purchased that property as part of the project to eventually widen and add a turn lane at the Prospect and LeMay intersection. And so the city continues to own that land, but would be dividing and selling a portion of that property to come and go for this project, with the home being protected in place, and the remaining lot remaining in the city ownership. Here's a view of the project site looking southeast from the Prospect and LeMay intersection. So you can see that existing fuel station, automotive repair service station, and the lots to the south on the left of the screen. And then this is a view looking south. This says from LeMay on the slide, but this is south from Prospect Road. So the home on the right-hand side of the screen here is that historic eligible property that would be protected in place with this project.
Okay, that's the 945 East Prospect Road property.
That is correct.
Okay, and the city has owned that since 1991. I mean, does the city lease that property, or is it currently vacant, or what?
You know, I do not know the answer to that question off the top of my head, but we can try to find the answer to that question during this hearing.
Okay, great. And I go ahead and continue.
That concludes my overview of the site, and so I will stop my screen share here for the applicant to present the project in greater detail.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. So I will go ahead now and turn it over to the applicant team for the presentation. And Erica, will you be presenting then on behalf of?
Yep, I will. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Cool. And then are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So this is for our come and go store number 951. As Rebecca said, it's located at the southwest corner of Prospect and LeMay. And I wanted to show just again the existing conditions. So we're going to be taking up a portion of this western lot, and then all of this lot that's in between the historic eligible house and the existing fuel station, as well as this lot that is, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but just south of the fuel station. Here is our site plan. So you can see the just over 4,000 square foot building. The building footprint and articulation is designed to sort of match the historic house here to the west. So we have a bump out in the center, and then it comes around, and we're matching the colors and architecture as well. I'll show that later. Here is the site landscaping plan. So we're proposing several large trees along Prospect, along the new turn lane, as well as on LeMay, with a new tree lawn here and a new bus stop just north of our drive entrance off of LeMay, which will be a full movement access, and that will be our only access point for the site. There are several existing trees along the southern property line that we're going to preserve in place with this project. And then we're going to add a couple of additional large trees along the south and west to help screen the residential property to the south. Here's a look at our elevations. We have the canopy and the building both matching the same similar roof line style as the residential property to the east that we're maintaining. And then same thing with the colors and the materials that we're using on the outside of the building. And then here is a nice pretty rendering of what the site will look like when it's constructed and nice and green and pretty in the summer. We have a screen wall just at the southeast corner of the building to shield headlights from LeMay. and several plantings around the perimeter of the building and along Prospect, a smaller monument sign. And we tried to keep the building colors and everything kind of low profile to match the surrounding area. And here's a look from Prospect facing southeast. So you can see the historic house, trash enclosure is heavily screened by evergreens and some more colorful plants in the front, and then the building. Facing northwest, gets a look at the front of the building and the canopy. And another look at the screen wall and bus stop area. And eventually there will be I believe a bus shelter installed in that extra concrete in between the screen wall and that tree that's in the front. And then here is a look at what the interior of the convenience store will look like. We're going to have this kitchen area where Come and Go has fresh food, healthy choices, an indoor seating area. So if you need to hang out for a little while, you can plug into free Wi-Fi. And then here's the aisles. It's nice and open and clear, and just lots of different options. And I can open it up for questions, or actually no, it's the applicant presentation, but we can come back to questions later, I believe.
Okay, thank you, Erica, for that presentation. I'll hold any questions I have until the end of the staff presentation, and perhaps until after we've gotten through public comment. So with that, Rebecca, maybe let me turn it back over to staff at this point to run through staff's presentation.
Yes, thank you. Get my screen shared again. Okay, also, I did want to mention that in my overview, I mentioned that the home that is eligible for historic designation would retain in city ownership. I think that's not fully correct. The city is looking to sell that home as part of this development project. I don't know that the final kind of disposition of that property has been determined yet, but that may or may not actually remain in city ownership. So I just wanted to correct that for the record. All right, I want to start with a description of the one modification of standard that is requested. So as I mentioned, there is a requirement in the code that for separation between gas stations with convenience stores. The code requires a separation of 3/4 of a mile between those types of land uses. And there is an existing fuel station across the street at the same intersection to the east, and then another that's about 80 feet away, and then another gas station with a convenience store less than 3/4 of a mile away at East Elizabeth and LeMay. So there are two other fueling stations in close proximity. As I mentioned, this is already an existing fueling station. The reason for this standard, from staff's understanding, this section of code has been in the code since before really even the land use code was adopted. It's kind of a carryover from the old land development guidance system that existed before 1997 when the land use code was first adopted. And so the best understanding that we have of the reason for this requirement is to ensure that neighborhood centers are really viable for a mix of commercial uses and a mix of uses that directly serve neighborhoods and do not result in proliferation of kind of automobile-oriented development patterns. When I showed the zoning map, you can see the NC, the neighborhood commercial district, extends beyond just this corner of the intersection. This corner of the intersection, there there are other commercial uses that could occupy that corner. But because it has been used historically as a fueling station, staff's finding was that is this proposal to replace this site with a new gas station is relatively equivalent to what exists on site today, and so does not it is kind of an equivalent project and does not deviate from the standard in the code in more than a nominal and inconsequential way. There are also some physical hardships related to this property, given the narrowness of the site, the need for access onto both Prospect and LeMay, and some of the constraints that come with the need to provide a right turn lane and other things that do limit the potential land uses that could be built on this site. So with all of that, staff finds that modification meets the criteria for the modification of standard requirements, and the three criteria that are that it is kind of what is proposed is equal to or better than what would otherwise be permitted in the code, that there are some physical hardships that affect this site, and that the proposal does not deviate from the code except in a nominal and inconsequential way, given the existing condition. We also find that it is not detrimental to the public good, which is another finding that's needed for a modification of standard.
Thank you, Rebecca. Let me maybe just ask you a couple of quick questions. So I will just note that in reviewing section 2.8.1 of the code, it's clear to me that I would have authority to grant a modification of standard if the applicable conditions are satisfied, because 2.8.1 does specifically state that the decision maker is empowered to grant modifications to any of the Article 3 standards or the land use standards and development standards contained in Article 4, which we're not talking about here. But it goes on to say that the decision maker can also grant a modification related to any separation or proximity standard established as a specific measurement of distance, which I think is what we're talking about here. I'm curious as to, I know that obviously the right-hand turn lane from Prospect to LeMay is an element of this project, and I don't have the exact language from the staff report in front of me, but I remember seeing some language that project had been identified in the capital improvement plan for some time, maybe going back as far as maybe even the 1980s. I may have that date incorrect. But I'm just wondering, procedurally, how is the city's capital improvement plan formally adopted? Is it adopted as a component of the city's budget document, or is it otherwise formally adopted by ordinance or resolution of city council? And the reason I ask is that one of the criteria, specifically, I believe 2.8.2 H2, that language is tying the potential granting of a modification to alleviating a problem of citywide concern, but it has to be an issue that is defined and described in the comprehensive plan or an adopted policy, ordinance, or resolution of city council. And so my question is really focused on that. Is the capital improvement plan adopted formally by city council? Could it be considered a policy, ordinance, or resolution of council?
Yeah, I'm gonna see if our engineering staff who are on the line might have an answer to that question about how the capital improvement plan is adopted, whether that's kind of administratively approved by city staff or the city manager, or whether that's adopted by council. Staff, in this case, on this project, staff did not make a finding that particular criteria of the modification, the list of modification criteria, that criteria number 2 was met, that this substantially alleviates a defined community kind of problem or need. That's So that is a finding that could be made, but it's not necessary to be made for a modification of standard to be approved, because only one of the criteria need to be satisfied for the approval of a modification of standard, if that makes sense. But
Oh, yeah, understood, but if
Okay.
there's somebody
Yeah.
on staff that can help answer that question about whether the city's CIP is formally adopted by city council, whether as a standalone document or perhaps incorporated into the budget that's formally adopted by city council, that would be, I'm just
Yeah.
good background for me to have at this point.
I think it's a good question. I'm gonna see Tim Dinger is here with us from our engineering department. Let's see if Tim might have more information on that question, how the capital improvement plan is adopted. Oh, Tim, you're muted.
I apologize. Hi, Mr. McAskin. I'll be completely honest. I'm not 100% sure about the capital improvement adoption, since that's kind of a different department than what I work in. That being said, I believe it's done administratively, but I would have to check in with somebody from the capital improvements department to be sure about that.
That's fine, Tim, and I don't necessarily need that answer tonight, right? I mean, if you check in with somebody and can even follow up with an email to me, tomorrow or even early next week, that would be great if you can.
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thanks.
Sure.
So, thank you. So Rebecca, I'll turn it back over to you if you want to go ahead and proceed with the balance of staff's presentation.
Great, thank you. Let me move on here. Okay, so I'd like to talk a little bit about the site landscape plan and conditions of approval that are proposed by staff. So this site plan shows where the single point of access is off of LeMay, down in the southern portion of the site, southern edge of the site. South of that access point is a landscape strip between this development and the adjacent property. This project would include, as we've mentioned, the construction of an eastbound right turn lane along East Prospect. So that's, if you can see my cursor, that's over here with that turn lane with the little turn lane island up in the corner there. There was a variance request approved for the width of the drive entrance to allow for fuel truck circulation. Those types of variances are approved by our city engineer and outside of this hearing process. The project would replace an existing bus bench with an upgraded covered bus shelter along LeMay. So would not get rid of the existing bus stop, would upgrade the existing bus stop. There are landscape areas and low architectural walls proposed in areas of the site to provide some screening and definition to the site. And as we previously mentioned, the project shares a boundary with the historically eligible home to the west. The areas shown with these arrows here are the subject of one of the staff conditions of approval. There's a requirement in 3.2.2 of the code related to parking lot landscaping that dictates that 6% of an interior parking lot must be landscaped, and that's currently not met. So staff recommends a condition of approval to add landscaping in these two portions of the site that are highlighted with the red arrows to achieve that requirement. That would result in the elimination of one parking space in staff's assessment. And so that's a condition of approval. There are 16 parking spaces provided on site, as I had mentioned. That is within the range of parking that would be required. The maximum amount that would be allowed on the site is 16 parking spaces. So to reduce the parking count down to 15 is still keeps the project in compliance with parking standards. There is a second condition to meet bike parking requirements. So there's a requirement for both enclosed and fixed bike parking spaces. So enclosed means kind of covered, sheltered from the weather, or indoor bike parking spaces. And let me just get to the staff report here to just clarify how many bike parking spaces would be required under that condition. So four parking spaces would be required. At least one needs to be enclosed, and 3 on fixed racks. More than one could be enclosed and still meet the requirement. That's considered kind of an enhanced level of bike parking to be covered or sheltered. There's also a condition of approval related to hours of operation. The current fuel station on the site operates from 7:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Saturday. And that helps to limit some of the noise and lighting and other impacts to the adjacent residential properties. And so the condition of approval that is proposed includes a limitation on the hours of operation for this convenience store with fuel station. The hours of operation in the staff condition of approval do not match what is existing on the site today, but the proposed hours of operation in staff's condition would be limited to 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Friday, and 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Saturday and Sunday. And that complies then with section 3.5.1J of the code that relates to operational compatibility standards.
Okay, and Rebecca, just one quick question to clarify. Did you say that the current station operates from 7:30 a.m. to 5 p.m.? Or
I
6 p.m.?
did say that Monday through Saturday, and then it is closed on Sundays currently.
Okay. Yeah, I just, because the staff report, I believe, says 7:30 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Okay,
But if it's,
that
but
might,
anyway,
yeah, that might be a
understand
point
that.
of clarification we can provide, because the notes I have in the presentation here say 5 p.m. and
Okay.
I'm going off of what
Sure.
I've got from Kai here, so I'm happy
Yeah,
to
and-
clarify that.
Yeah, and but obviously there's some the proposed hours of operation included in the condition of approval are 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Friday, and 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Saturday and Sunday.
That's correct.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, and that's generally consistent with where we see hours of operation occurring for and deliveries and things like that occurring on other commercial properties. And you know, I'm not aware of any restrictions that require the current hours of operation to be what they are beyond kind of preference of that business owner. So staff looked at what would be a reasonable condition to impose on hours of operation that also minimizes nighttime impacts to neighbors. Do you have other questions, Marcus, on this, any of those topics before I move on?
I do not.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
Wanted to just show, this is an applicant provided graphic, but this compares the architectural elevations for the proposed building to the adjacent building that is eligible for historic designation, as well as the proposed trash enclosure, including similarities in materials, roof style, and colors to what exists on that single family home today. So the main driver behind the architectural design for the site was relationship to the existing historic building, including kind of the amount of window area and overall kind of proportions and form of some of the buildings, and then the design of the trash enclosure as well. So that you saw here is the elevation on the north side of the building. Kind of, we're looking south at it here. As we go here, these are the south and east elevations of the building. So on top is the view from the south looking north toward the building. And the main entrance from the parking canopy or the gas station canopy areas. And then the image on the bottom is the eastern elevation that you would see from LeMay. Here is a view of the fuel canopies, which are required to have a similar roof type to the roof of the building and generally match colors, material, style of the convenience store building and provide more of a residential feel in terms of the architectural style. So staff finds that those requirements have been met. Quick view again of the trash enclosure. I'll just note that it does meet requirements for providing equivalent space for both trash and recycling facilities and includes separate doors for service from trash and recycling vehicles, as well as a person entrance to drop trash and recycling off separate from the vehicle entrance, which are both required in the code. Moving on to landscaping, the site today includes 39 trees that are already existing. This project would remove 30 of those trees. The code does allow for removal of those trees if mitigation is provided. There are a couple ways that there are really 3 ways that tree mitigation can be accomplished according to the code. One is to replace those trees and kind of an equivalent value on site. So that could be for a larger, more mature tree. There could be up to 5 trees required for replacement of that one tree that's lost, or as few as 1 tree that's required to replace it. The second method that can be used is to what's called upsizing new trees that are proposed. So instead of planting a tree of a smaller diameter on site, if a larger older tree is used and planted instead, it gives that tree a head start on growth and can be used to meet those mitigation requirements as well. It counts as kind of credit toward the mitigation value. And then the third method that can be used is a payment in lieu to pay for the planting of trees off site on other sites in the community that the city's forestry department deems appropriate for those plantings and where that canopy may be most needed. So on this site, there are 39 trees that exist today. The forestry staff identified a total value of trees of 52.5 trees that would need to be replaced if all of those trees were removed. And so 30 trees are proposed to be removed from the site. 19 would be mitigated on the property, and 21 would be mitigated through a payment in lieu to city forestry for additional tree planting elsewhere off-site. Let's talk about landscape buffer and screening and protection from adjacent properties for adjacent properties. So that landscape buffer would include a 6-foot privacy fence that's typical in a residential context with stone columns evenly spaced to add some more kind of design and strength and architectural appeal to that fence. There would be a landscape strip to the south that varies from 11 to 19 feet. So you can see the narrowest point here at 11 feet. Which is wide enough to support trees and other landscaping, and it widens out to 19 feet at its widest point. There is a landscape area attached to that's west of the fuel pumps. That's 15 feet in width. And then there is a landscape bed near the along the northern portion of the site, along that historic home site, that helps to provide some screening for headlights and these parking areas and the trash enclosure area here that might have some noise and lighting impacts. So that helps to mitigate those impacts. Quick view of the details of the fence and the screen walls that help to provide that buffering. Finally, I'll mention lighting standards. This diagram's not meant to be read on screen like this, but it is included in the packet. This is the photometric lighting plan that shows that the lighting levels zero out at the property line. And so there's not spillover lighting impacts to adjacent properties. Typically, the biggest lighting impact associated with gas stations is in those canopies. We do have in the code pretty stringent requirements for flush mounting of lights, so those light fixtures don't drop down and create more glare, and for light levels that provide safety and security under those canopies and good visibility under those canopies, but don't cause a lot of light spillover outside of the site itself or outside of the canopies themselves. So this project as proposed does comply with the limits of the LC1 lighting district, which is applicable to this site, or I'm sorry. Staff proposes a condition of approval that would bring the site into compliance with the limits of the LC1 lighting district. And that would be to reduce off-hour site lighting down to that lower lighting level to improve neighborhood compatibility. This site is actually located in the LC2 lighting district. This condition of approval would reduce those lighting levels after hours down to the level of a more residential lighting context. And that's what the LC1 lighting district reflects, more of a neighborhood residential context. So that's the intent of that condition of approval. All right, this is the and a final staff findings here. Staff finds with the Come and Go project development plan, PDP 210013, that the project applies or complies with the applicable requirements in Article 2 of the Land Use Code, and that the project complies with the standards in Article 3 of the Land Use Code, as long as 4 conditions of approval are applied. So staff recommends a condition related to bicycle parking, the parking lot interior landscaping, the hours of operation, and then finally the lighting, the off-hour, after-hours site lighting. Staff further finds that the PDP complies with the requirements for the neighborhood commercial district in Article 4 of the code, and staff recommends approval of the request for the modification of standard to section 4.2.3 or 4.23 B2C8, which is that separation requirement from other fueling stations. Finally, staff recommends approval of both the modification of a standard and the Come and Go project as proposed and with those conditions of approval. So I will end the screen share and welcome any questions and the opportunity to respond to public comment.
Thank you, Rebecca. I appreciate that staff overview of the project. Before we open it up to the public comment portion of the hearing tonight, a question for Erica or the applicant team. I mean, there are 4 proposed conditions of approval. Are those conditions of approval conditions that have been reviewed and agreed to by Come and Go at this point, or
That one I'll need Tom and Dan probably to provide some input on.
Hi, my name is Tom Carrico. I'm with Come and Go. I'm a real estate manager with Come and Go. I do have a couple questions and clarifications as it relates to this. The first clarification is with the home that has been designed for designation for historicals. We have that property under contract with the city of Fort Collins, and we are currently waiting to go before city council in order to complete that purchase. So just wanted to let everybody know that that was one of the things we talked to the city about when we first started in with this project. The second is on the condition of approval for the hours of operations. Just curious as to why we would be held to the standard of closing at 7 o'clock when the 7-Eleven that's across the street is open 24 hours. And so we've had some discussions as it relates to the hours of operations with the city and the city staff. But the hours that have been discussed are a surprise to us. We had always talked about from, I believe it's from 5 to 11, 7 days a week. So that's my comments on it, and I can turn it over to Dan if he has any additional comments.
Okay, but Tom,
That's my understanding as well.
or maybe Dan, before you jump in, but in terms of the bicycle parking, the interior parking lot landscaping, and the lighting condition, namely that the lights be dimmed during off hours to comply with the LC1 standards. Those are all acceptable at this point.
Yes, and we did discuss with Kai, particularly on the lighting, that all of our fixtures will actually be dimmable for that specific reason. So I think all those other items have been discussed and agreed to. I think the one that we were told would not be a condition would be the restricted hours, but that we were certainly willing to work with the city and the neighbors to reduce from 24-hour, which would be standard operation for us, down to a more restrictive time frame. That does differ quite a bit from what we did discuss specifically though on the hours.
Yeah, and Dan, just for my for my notes here on the hearing, what's your title with Come and Go, sir?
Yes, I am the site development manager for Come and Go.
Site development manager. And Tom, you were director of real estate, or what was the title?
I'm a real estate. We don't call it a real estate manager, but we call it which
Real
is
estate
essentially
development
what we
manager.
are. Yeah, real estate development manager, like official title. So
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay. Great. And Rebecca, before we get to the public comment portion of the hearing, do you have any further comments on those the proposed reduced hours of operation that are set forth in staff's condition of approval?
No, I don't have the full history from Kai on this. And trying to find a little bit more information kind of in the background here to understand kind of when that condition kind of arose in the process. But that is this is a type of condition of approval that we have applied or recommended as staff on other projects that have a similar context, where there is a neighborhood directly adjacent that might be impacted by things like noise and lighting late at night, and late at night and early in the morning with deliveries and trash service and things like that. I will note that the site plan does include, the trash enclosure includes a small portion where a trash truck would need to back up and have the kind of backup sounds happening on site. And so there are, we receive complaints on other sites around the city in the areas where those types of operations happen very early in the morning or happen late at night that can cause some impacts. And so that is the intent behind that recommendation of approval, but I don't have the full history of what might have been discussed and kind of specifics on the hours that were selected.
And in terms of how those hours are imposed on not just this site, but other similar sites within the city that may have a residential context, are those hours of operation then just simply set forth in the FTP? Or Or is there a covenant, or what's the enforcement mechanism?
Yeah, the enforcement mechanism is a note on the final development plan, on the site plan. And if there is an observed violation of those hours of operation, that would trigger a zoning violation process that could result in a citation. If it's not corrected, and that is, we have proceeded with enforcement of hours of operation on other sites in the past.
Okay,
And if it does make a difference, we are able to restrict those hours of delivery times. And Come and Go does actually deliver our own fuel, so we can set those schedules specifically and prohibit delivery during certain hours. We certainly don't want to disturb the neighbors either.
okay, thank you, Dan. So that, I appreciate that additional input. So at this point, it is 6:21 PM. Let's go ahead and open the public comment portion of the hearing. And Katie, I'm going to probably look to you to help with this process. But again, for those of you that may have joined late, if you are participating in the hearing via Zoom, please do use the raise hand function at the bottom of the screen to get into the queue. Or if you're listening via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand as well. So Katie, how many members of the public do we approximately at this point have signed up for public comment?
At this point, I'm seeing 3 hands raised.
Okay, so who's the first individual?
Sure. It did just jump to 4, but the first individual is listed as Colin. So Colin, I'm going to allow you to speak. You should be able to unmute yourself and state your name and address for the record, and then begin your comment.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
I can, thank you.
Yeah, my name is Colin Campbell, and I'm a resident and owner of a house on a nearby street, Lake Place, 1105 East Lake Place, which is just a block or two away from this property. My concern is about the traffic flow. The traffic going northbound on LeMay who want to turn left into this property, I think are going to have difficulty because of the volume of traffic from the other 3 directions. The traffic that's turning south off of Prospect, the traffic that's turning south, well, both directions off of Prospect, as well as the traffic going straight through southbound on LeMay. And those other 3 traffic flows happen in sequence based on the traffic lights. And so I think it makes it difficult. The extent of the volume of the traffic from those other 3 will make it difficult for the northbound traffic to turn left to cross through that traffic to get into the property. And I think this is especially true during the 3 rush hour times, you know, people going to work in the morning, during lunch break, and going home from work, as well as the people that are either dropping off or picking up their kids from the schools. And there's a bunch of schools nearby who would be likely passing through these intersections. I had a little email correspondence with Steve Gilchrist, and I think he indicated that your staff had looked at, done some sort of a study of the traffic patterns, and decided that this wasn't going to be a problem. And if so, they might have a legal thing in the paperwork that says that they can stop any left-hand traffic or do something to not allow that northbound traffic to turn left into the property, after all, as something in a future that they could pull the trigger on that. So first of all, you know, I sort of have a specific question. Have you done any quantitative measurements with equipment to characterize that southbound traffic right at the entrance of the property, essentially, in order to quantitatively say whether or not this is really a problem or not, rather than a qualitative judgment on that matter. And secondly, if you do, go through with this project with this right-hand lane and so forth, and if you do decide to prohibit that left turn, as I described, what's that going to look like? How is that constructed? Is it going to be like a retaining wall or something like that to prevent that left turn? And if so, do you build your lanes ahead of time to account for that additional structure so that you don't have to tear up the roads a second time in order to implement that? Does that make sense?
It does, Mr. Campbell. So I appreciate those comments, and for both that question and for the other public comment, what we'll do is we'll go through all of the public comments, and then we'll turn it back over to the applicant and applicant team and city staff to respond. So really, your main question has to do with that left-hand turn movement from northbound LeMay into the subject property. And what my understanding in reviewing the staff report is that there was a traffic impact study that was submitted and reviewed by the city. So we'll have an opportunity to have folks answer that question.
Thank you for listening.
Katie, who do we have as the second speaker signed up?
Yes, so our second speaker is Stacy McGee, and you should be able to speak now, Stacy.
Thank you very much. My name is Stace McGee. I live at 917 East Prospect Road, approximately 3 houses to the west of the property. First off, to the city folks, I wanted to say thank you very much for putting the turning lane in and closing a curb cut on Prospect. We appreciate that. We also appreciate you talking about the hours of operation and limiting those hours of operation. But personally, the applicant said as long as they're doing no deliveries in those early or late hours, I think as a neighbor who lives very close, I think I'd be okay with something of that nature, because it really is the trash cans and the beeping and things of that nature that provide a lot of noise. I don't think a lot of people are going to be going there at 10 and 11 o'clock at night or 5 in the morning. The main thing that I wanted to address is the abrupt change in the character of the architecture. Right now, we have a quaint little old gas station, and we have a couple old historic houses. And I think that there was no effort made on the garbage enclosure at all. It looks just like a standard garbage enclosure. And I think that there was very limited effort made on the main building to give it any kind of a residential character, as you all said. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGee. Katie, who do we have next?
Yep, so next up is Diane Campbell. And Diane, you should be able to speak now.
Hopefully you. I am a homeowner that lives very close to this area. And my concerns, we have read the proposal. The impact on our street, which is East Lake Place, we actually had, right after the proposal came out, we had a neighborhood gathering. And we are all single family owners pretty much on our street. Everyone was a bit concerned about this for several reasons. We have a residential street that is kind of a quarter circle, and it connects with LeMay and it connects with East Lake Street, which Prospect can then access East Lake Street. We have a lot of people concerned because, number one, we're residential. We have small children on our street. We have a lot of school traffic. In the evenings, there is no street light on our street. When people turn off LeMay, it looks like you're going down a country road. It's pitch black. And there's already a high level of traffic, people that cut through to go to the school, drop off their kids, get out to LeMay, as well as a lot of people that come in, turn around to get back on LeMay. They may have made a wrong turn or something like that. And I anticipate we're going to have higher levels of traffic because someone sees a gas station, they will turn in on Lake Street off of Prospect and then make another circle around to get on LeMay and then go south to access Come and Go. I'm concerned because this really starts changing the character of our neighborhood. And I think what we felt as a group was that a condition of a speed bump on our street, consistent, always there, would help deter some of that. It is a concern also because LeMay traffic is very heavy, southbound, northbound. And if you even look at the illustration that Ms. Everett put up, the southbound LeMay traffic is very heavy, even in that picture, and I don't know what time of day it was taken. And the reason I'm concerned about that is there also is a potential for accidents, people slowing down to turn into a gas station, and someone's turning right, or the traffic's heavy and they're trying to make the light. There's a lot of people that speed through that light to go south. Also on Prospect, there is very, very heavy east-west traffic in the morning and in the afternoon. I would say our traffic gets heavier about 3:30 in the afternoon or 3. And then you have football traffic in addition to that. So the character of the location, I'm concerned because while that already had a quote gas station in that location, I would picture it and describe it as a very sleepy gas station. Not a lot of gas fill up traffic. It was mostly a mechanic, and their hours, I'd be surprised if they always were open till 5, except for being a mechanic. It was not very heavily used. And I think that having another convenience store gas station combination across the street from one that's already existing, and with a gas station convenience store that's 3/4 of a mile north, is just too much in this one location. I think you would have much more success and patronization if you went further east, because people coming in and going out of Fort Collins, there's some nice big busy intersections and they could utilize it much more successfully. I do agree on limited hours because the nature of this gas station, I would say for 40 years, has been very low volume, and they just aren't used much. And to put in something that would have this consistent usage all the time, plus the lighting, plus the noise, I think really is a bit much. And I would heartily ask, number one, that you decline the request for this proposal. And number two, if for some reason you're going to go through it, I would say it's mandatory you put a speed bump on East Lake Place immediately, because the safety of the kids on our street is just paramount. And we already see people speeding around that curve. And the hard thing is, with our street, we have very, very tall evergreens that impact what drivers can see. And so they're starting to speed one way or the other. They don't see oncoming cars or children or bikes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Appreciate those comments. Katie, do we have other speakers that have their hand raised on this project?
Yes. Next up is Jeff Hill. Jeff, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, first, I would just like to appreciate the city for all of the planning that's gone in place already for this. It's obvious We have a professional team and experienced team, and thank them for that. And also appreciate everything that Come and Go's done, especially the very great designs to help the community know what's going in, and consideration of the historic property. That's a great citizen to have in our city. So I think the first question I have is the walkability and safety. So this would be for employees of Come and Go or customers of a Come and Go that are walking from the neighborhood areas into the convenience store. So I think that's certainly something that business would want to encourage. So it was nice to see the island being placed for the right-hand turn going southbound. So thank you for thinking of that. I was curious, it looked a little bit smaller than the one on the 7-Eleven side. And I was just kind of curious about why that was smaller and maybe a little less safe feeling. I also, I'm on 1113 East Lake Place. And I also would kind of second that I think we should consider in that traffic study to make sure we're looking at unsafe travel on Lake Street and Lake Place. And I do think something like a speed bump might kind of deter some of that traffic that is obviously going to use those roads to get to the Come and Go. Appreciated the fact that the lighting was considered, and they're on timers for dimming, and just making sure they're on timers so that that does happen. I wanted to second the architectural opinions. It looked a lot like the Come and Goes that I've seen in many of the kind of pop-up neighborhoods. So I don't think that we could advertise that this is sort of matching the residential area. So just make sure that's clear. And then how many peak employees will be working on site? So just making sure that that 15/16 parking spots is sufficient to allow employees to have ease of access to park, and maybe not park in the neighborhoods, which is also an issue in the neighborhoods right now between students and employees of some of the other commercial districts before there was city planning. And then also kind of for that safety aspect, I wanted to understand if perhaps we should have a little bit of a turn lane coming into the Come and Go southbound, where that bus stop is, and coming into the gas station. It seems like if people are going at a fast speed southbound on LeMay, that there needs to be a little bit of a buffer area where they can slow down and pull into the gas station safely and not hit walkers and other cars. And then wanted to understand, is there going to be like music playing in the gas station, and kind of what the noise levels of that would be? And that's my final comment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. And again, we will allow the applicant and staff to try to weigh in on some of these issues and questions that have been raised during the public comment portion. Katie, do we have anybody else signed up at this point?
Yes, we have one final hand raised, and this is Joe. Joe, if you could state your name and address for the record and begin speaking.
Thank you. My name is Joe Helm, and I live at 1700 C Spring Meadows Court. It's in the Spring Meadows condominium area, which is just south and a little bit west of this intersection. And I would just reconfirm that I'm very much in favor of the reduced hours versus the 24 hours. As other people have mentioned, the current station is just open during the daytime and rarely on the weekends. And this would just create a lot more activity. And I think for them to be open for more hours than the staff recommendation, you know, would just hurt this area immensely. The other question I had was in relation to the environment, and I understand there are two stations there already. But if you'll look at the topography from Prospect and LeMay going towards Spring Creek, it kind of goes down, and I'm wondering if anybody's looked at, unfortunately, if there was an environmental problem where the water flow would go down into Spring Creek and then thus contaminate the creek. So that's just a question, is if somebody has looked at that or not. And thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And I'm sorry, did you say your last name was Hill, or did I miss that?
Helm, H-E-L-M, like helm in a boat.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Helm. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Katie, do we have anybody else queued up right now?
I am not seeing any other hands raised.
Okay, so we don't have any other hands raised at this point. Let's see. I'll go ahead and close the public comment portion of the hearing at 6:41 p.m. And let me hand it back over to Erica and the applicant team. Maybe you guys, I mean, at this point, maybe you can take a first crack at addressing some of these questions and issues that have been raised by Mr. Campbell, Mr. McGee, Ms. Campbell, Mr. Hill, and Mr. Helm. Obviously, a lot of them are, I think, focused on traffic and architecture with some other safety concerns as well. But I'll turn it back over to you and your team at this point.
Okay, so I was taking some notes on the questions and I'll try to hit most of them. I apologize if I miss any. So the main one that I hear is concerns of traffic. And we did do a full traffic impact study with our PDP process. And the study was approved, and a part of that study is doing traffic counts. And we actually do 2 sets of traffic counts for come and go, just as a standard as part of our development process. We do one initially when we kick the project off, and then one when we initiate the traffic study. So that hopefully answers the question about it being measured and concrete, and not just a guess based on what we see driving through that intersection. The result of the traffic study is that it does support a full movement access with the current volumes that are there. And if there are issues in the future with growth of the city, the right or I guess the access could potentially be restricted to a right in, right out. And that would have to be determined at a later date, probably with a new traffic study. I might need Dan to comment on the speed bump or the city. That seems like a reasonable proposal to me, but I'm not the expert there or the decision maker on what happens within city right of way.
And I appreciate that, Erica, and that may be something that I maybe ask Rebecca or some of city staff to weigh in on. It's been a number of years, but my recollection is that independent of whether that speed bump could be potentially installed as part of this project as I suppose kind of an offsite improvement. The city, my recollection is that the city does have a program where neighborhoods can apply for a speed bump or other traffic calming measures. But again, it's been a while, and that program may have been updated, or probably has been updated. So maybe we can have city staff weigh in on that as well. But go ahead. I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay. And then I think the last traffic related item is the concern for the need of a right turn lane into the come and go site to, I guess, reduce the number of conflict points. So with this project, we are actually removing essentially 3 conflict points from Prospect and LeMay, 2 on Prospect and 1 on LeMay, and reducing it down to just 1. So there's 4 now, will be 1 in the future. So that should help with the cars entering the street that could hit cars that are already on the streets. And then the right turn lane would ultimately just be a matter of determining if there's enough space to fit that. And that would have to be within city right of way as well. So we're a little bit limited on space, but with limiting the number of conflict points on LeMay, that should actually improve conditions. And then let's see. I think the last one that I want to hit on before I let Dan and Tom chime in is the lighting. So we are being held to essentially residential lighting standard on this site. So I did hear one concern of it being too dim, and we're happy to turn up the lights, but the residences surrounding immediately adjacent to the site might not appreciate that, or maybe there's just a happy medium in there that we can come to keep everybody safe on site and on the street surrounding.
And just to piggyback on that, Erica, we are 0 foot candles at the lot line. So there is no light spillover from our property. And all the lights are directional downlighting, it's all LED. So there will not be glare onto adjacent properties either. So in addition to that, the screen walls, the landscaping, I don't think that lighting will be a concern here.
Yep.
And I
And
can jump in on the architecture questions.
yeah,
that's
go
all.
ahead and I'll just review and make sure that I hit everything.
Sure. We did work with staff for over a year on the design of the building. And I can tell everybody that this will be the least prototypical store that we probably have or ever will build. We know that that's important to Fort Collins, and because we want to be here and we want to be a member of the community, we have changed pretty much every aspect of the design of our stores. So specifically, every building material has been changed. So these are full brick and stone buildings, including the trash enclosure. I know there was a comment about the trash enclosure. The reason it looks sort of plain is because it's meant to match the building architecture. It has a basin and then it has brick above that, but it's a fully enclosed trash enclosure. So there won't be any parts that are visible to the public, and it'll be, again, matching building materials. We changed our signage. So normally we'd have a red oval sign, and here we actually are painting that oval on the brick. And then we're doing a white channel letter sign over that. And then same thing, just the white channel letters on the elevation with the residence. On that residence elevation, we've actually matched the roof line of the house into the architecture of the building. And then we've carried that element around as well to the gas canopy that has a sort of a hip element to it. And then we brought that into the awnings on all sides of the building as well with 4-sided architecture. I'm trying to think if there's anything I'm missing. So we've upgraded all the materials. We've changed our blade wall, which would normally be red. That's the sort of the metal panel element that sticks out from the front of the building. We've made that black. Again, the only one that we've ever done that way, to fit in with the rest of the color palette, to be less, to be more subdued, and then also to sort of match with the architecture of the adjacent building and with the rest of the color palette of this building. So if there's any other specific questions on any of that, I'm happy to dive in as much detail as anyone wants, but this is all working closely hand in hand with Kai and Rebecca's team to come to something that we're sort of limited by the size of the building anyway, so to some extent, just based on the geometry of the building, it's going to look similar. But from an actual design standpoint, there isn't anything that remains prototypical on this building.
Okay, thank you, Dan. I do see Steve Gilchrist, traffic operations, with his hand raised. And Steve, I don't know if you were going to potentially jump in on the traffic calming or mitigation measures on on Lake Place, but I don't know, Katie, if you can maybe, oh, great. Steve, you're unmuted. Floor is
Yeah,
yours.
I can speak to our neighborhood traffic mitigation program. That is still in place. It's a program we have that it's not really pushed through our development review. It's not something we have anything in the code that can require them to install speed bumps. And part of the reason is we don't do that just arbitrarily. It's something we do petition neighborhoods. We require, a consensus to be achieved with those neighborhoods. And then the other thing with our speed bumps too is the petitioning of the direct and adjacent homeowners. There are some impacts with noise and stuff that we allow them some type of veto too. So it's something we can definitely work with the Campbells on that program. If they want to reach out to traffic operations, we have a program manager that they can contact, and what he will do is he will evaluate the street, collect data to see what the existing traffic volume, speeds, those types of things are. And then if we see this development come in, and if it's increasing, we can look at, those speed bumps. Even if this development doesn't come in, we can look at those speed bumps as well. So that's a program that's in place now. It's still operational. So it's one, just contact our office and we can definitely work with you on that.
That's great, Steve. I really, I had remembered that program existed, but I know that sometimes those programs come and they go, but it's but it's nice to know that that's still in place, and hopefully if the Campbells are still on the line, they heard that and they can reach out to your office for additional assistance in that regard.
Absolutely.
Okay. Rebecca, is there anything that that you think you'd like to add in terms of clarification, in terms of responding to some of the questions and issues that were raised during the public comment portion of the hearing?
Yes, and thank you. And I'd actually like to invite Steve to come back on screen to respond to a few more of the traffic questions that came up, and make sure we've got the the city response on those as well, related to the potential median on LeMay, the turning movements on eastbound LeMay, and some of the other questions and concerns that we heard. So Steve, I'll pass it to you.
Absolutely, thank you. Just to kind of go back through the Campbell's comments, one was the access in the northbound left turn lane. That's where within the traffic study, we had them evaluate that intersection level of service. And that's where it was determined at this time it meets our criteria for that level of service. And so that's where we made the determination based on the traffic counts that they provided and that study that we can allow it at this time. In any case, when it comes to some of these bigger intersections, the city always reserves the right to restrict that access if it becomes a safety or operational issue. Those are things we monitor. If there's like a larger capital project coming in that possibly is going to add medians on LeMay, we would look at doing it at that time. We can also do that through some signage, those types of things on that exit. If it's something there's no median put in, it's just something that we have that right to do if it becomes a safety issue, and we can monitor that as they come forward or if it moves forward. Going back to the, so of course we discussed the speed bumps and the detouring of traffic. Sounds like some of that is some existing problems that are occurring, especially with school traffic and those types of things that I think our neighborhood traffic mitigation program would be a great tool to look into that. People coming and given the limited access to this site, we kind of had them close off that Prospect access, and they actually moved their access point as far south as possible, which helps operationally for the intersection of LeMay and Prospect itself. And it also helps safety wise if you can get those access points further from the intersection. And they've moved it pretty much to as far south as they possibly can within their property, other than that buffer. So that really helps operationally for the overall intersection level of service for LeMay and Prospect. Same with that right turn lane. We talk about a lot of the congestion there. That's going to help the overall operations and the delay, especially for that eastbound movement. It's one that right turn lane's been needed a long time. Just we have never had the ability to get the right of way with that smaller gas station there to provide that. So this is a great opportunity to, as they said, close off some of the access points, which helps safety, and then also provide that right turn lane that will help the capacity of that intersection.
The other thing that we're providing there is that island for the signal, and that turn lane does accommodate a WB 67 truck, so large semi. That's the reason why that island is so small, is because we're trying to fit that truck movement through the right turn, that curve there. that kind of cuts through the site. But it does still provide the pedestrian refuge that will help safety and walkability, in addition to widening the sidewalk on Prospect to 10 feet. We have trees in between the main walking path and the street. And then also on LeMay, we're detaching the sidewalk, and it's going to be 6 feet wide instead of the 4 that's out there today. That's right along the curb.
Looking through a couple other comments that we heard, I'll respond to comments on the hours of operations. So we were able to get in touch with Kai, kind of in the background here, to understand a little bit more of the what drove that particular condition of approval. The specific hours of operation that were selected for that condition were not necessarily driven by a particular comparable or some other kind of data that drove that. It was really looking at what might be reasonable with the neighborhood. So there's definitely some flexibility there, and what would kind of provide the best kind of business operations for the proposal and protection of the neighborhood from a compatibility perspective. Obviously, we heard some comments in favor of restrictions on the overall operations and comments supporting limits on operations specifically for deliveries, which the applicant has been willing to agree to. So as a staff, we would be happy to kind of work further through this conversation tonight, or even defer that hours of operation conversation a little bit later in the process, if that's the best approach. But staff does recommend, continue to recommend some limitation on hours of operation to ensure protection of the residential area.
I think we'd agree to that too as well. I think that's very reasonable.
Yeah, and Rebecca and Dan, I appreciate that. I mean, it really sounded like, probably some sort of hybrid approach, right? Where there's a kind of a hard cap or parameters for hours of operation, period, right? But then maybe, if city staff ultimately says, look, you can open a little bit earlier, stay open later, right? That there's some restrictions on trash pickup or fuel deliveries, right? Those because those tend to generate or have the most noise impact. So that's something that I would be comfortable probably deferring that to the FDP stage for the applicant to continue to work with staff on outlining what achieves that balance that I think Rebecca was just talking about, right? Balancing the business needs of your operation with the important needs of the surrounding community there. So does that work from the city's standpoint, Rebecca?
Yes, I think that if the applicant is agreeable to working on that, and we can retain, staff's recommendation would still be to retain a condition of approval that is that addresses this, so that there's some enforceability behind that conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that I'll do my best to incorporate what I've heard tonight, but then build in maybe some flexibility for city staff working with the applicant to vary from what the condition that I may have in that regard, right? If it ends up working best for both of the parties.
Great. Yeah. There were a couple other comments that I heard, and I may have missed in the applicant's response, but I want to make sure that those are addressed by the applicant. There was a question about the number of employees on site at peak times, and kind of how much parking would be needed to support that. There was also a question about noise level of any music or kind of sound coming from within the building. And then a question about the how any potential environmental hazards or spills or contamination would be how those would be managed, or how the Spring Creek or other resources or adjacent properties would be protected. So
and I can answer all those.
That back.
Yeah, thank you. As far as the noise goes, I don't know if the specific equipment that we're using now even has that incorporated, but regardless, it's dimmable and shut offable. So I don't think that's something we would have an objection to not doing. I know that we've done sound studies, and that the noise on our site is not able to be heard above ambient levels of the adjacent streets. So I think people have that concern generally. I think it's an appropriate concern. But the reality of it is we're a parking lot with a convenience store on it. So there's no horns blaring at different hours of day. There's maybe a delivery here and there, but there's no idling engines or anything like that. So I think people would be pleasantly surprised that it's not very disruptive. From the safety standpoint, all of our equipment, it really is the state of the art, most safe equipment that there is. So our underground tanks are double walled fiberglass tanks with an interstitial monitoring space. So any change in pressurization or any leak is immediately detected, and then we have teams that respond immediately to that as well. Everything is on shutoffs. Even if you forgot the handle of the pump in your car and you drove off, it would shut off immediately, so there wouldn't be any spillage, or it'd be very minimal. We are the only convenience store chain of any kind that has received AWS certification, which is the highest water quality certification, and that was in the Fountain Creek Watershed District in Colorado Springs. So it is something we take very seriously as a company, and we're rolling those elements that have helped us achieve that out to every store, and a lot of that's incorporated in this one as well. I don't know the specifics about drainage towards one creek or other, but I know that we do have, and Erica, you can probably get into specifics about how that drainage is handled if there were to be a leak. And I'll turn that over to you in a second. There's one more I feel like I'm forgetting.
Employees.
3 to 5, typically, over the course of a day. We usually designate the farthest stalls as employee parking. In this case, we don't have very many stalls around the building anyway. So I would say typically 1, maybe 2. I'm assuming that we'll have employees that walk and bicycle as well. But that would be the most it would be used at any given point. So I just wanted to comment too that I really appreciate the well thought out, good questions and comments that we've received. It's very much appreciated, and I guess about what I'd expect from Fort Collins. So thank you.
Yep, so I can speak to the drainage patterns on site and tell you that essentially all of the paved areas on site are going to be captured by on-site storm sewer, and then they're actually directed to a spill containment vault that we have on the site that is going to separate any minimal amount of fuel that may spill if somebody drives off with the pump still in their car from the water that enters our underground stormwater detention facility. So that's a piece of it. And I guess just going to Spring Creek, like you're really not going to see a whole lot of flow even leaving the site, since it is captured by our storm sewer system. Any of the flow that leaves the site is going to be much less than the existing condition that's leaving the existing fuel station. And it'll primarily pass through landscape areas before it sees the city right of way and LeMay and Prospect to head downstream.
So I can speak to why this location, and that was one of the questions that was brought up, that maybe there's more success if we moved to capture more traffic. So we as a company have been looking at the Fort Collins market for 10 plus years, if you will. And to the city's credit, they are very succinct in where they prefer to have gas station convenience stores and in their zonings, which is appreciated by us. Although very frustrating for me, but very appreciative of that as well. the reason it is attractive is that there are two stations there, right? We've been working with the Dunlops for over 3 years on the purchase of their property. And they've been very, very mindful of the competition that's in the area, and what's happening in the area, which again speaks to what we've done with the site plan as it relates to making changes and moving things around on the site plan. Just as a company, Come and Go we don't do stores just to do stores. And so we have to, be able to present to our executive committee that the store will in fact be successful. And we do a lot of vetting throughout that process. And this location does work for us from that perspective because there is the existing gas station there. It does meet some of the city requirements as it relates to that. And we believe that we can offer a better product for the citizens of Fort Collins. So, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate those comments. Anything further from the applicant or staff at this point on responding to some of the questions or issues that were raised during public comment?
I think we covered everything that I was able to note down during the public questions. Is there anything that you have, Rebecca, that we missed?
I don't have anything else that I noted for either staff or the applicant in my notes.
Okay.
Great. So with that, again, I'd like to thank staff. So Rebecca, thank you to you and your team. As usual, you put together a very thorough staff report, which I will spend some additional time going through concerning the application and the applicable Article 3 and 4 standards that are triggered here. But at this point, I don't think I have any further questions. As I mentioned before, when we opened the public hearing on this first of 3 projects tonight, I am required to issue a written decision within 10 business days of the conclusion of the hearing. And I appreciate everybody's participation tonight, both from the applicant side and the city side, and especially those members of the public that were able to join us on this Wednesday evening. So with that, I will close the public hearing on the Come and Go PDP at 7:07 p.m. Again, for the record, this is Marcus McCaskin, the hearing officer. The time is 7:13. Let's go ahead and open the public hearing on the second of 3 public hearings tonight. Again, this is PDP 210009, Jerome Street Station. The comments that I made earlier regarding jurisdiction, that I do have jurisdiction to conduct the hearing, will be incorporated, as will the comments that I made regarding the procedure to comment on Zoom. I will briefly review those again prior to the public comment portion of the hearing. And also the overview of the order of proceedings is deemed incorporated into this hearing as well. So Mr. Clark, I will turn it over to you, sir. Good to see you. And if you'd like to present just a brief overview of this project, and then we can get it turned over to the applicant team.
Hi, that's exactly right. Clark Mapes here, city planner. I will share my screen. And for the applicants, yes, this will be very brief. I know that the applicants have a pretty thorough presentation. Jerome Street Station Project Development Plan. I don't think, Mr. McCaskin, that you want to go back through these instructions for the meeting. Is that right?
Well, I wasn't going to go through the instructions, but I will quickly. I'm happy to do that since you have it here as part of the presentation. For those of you that are joining us via Zoom tonight or on the telephone, after we have heard from the city staff and the applicant, there will be an opportunity for public comment, and at that time, If you are participating via Zoom, please use the raise your hand function. If you are joining us via telephone, you want to use *9 in order to, city staff will then get you in the queue for public comment as well. So thank you, Clark, for the opportunity to review that. I can also quickly review the order of proceedings as well. So we're going to hear from Mr. Mapes with a quick overview of the project. There will then be an applicant presentation followed by a staff presentation. At that point, I will open up I will open up the public comment portion of the hearing, and then there will be an opportunity for both the applicant team and city staff to respond to questions and issues that are raised during the public comment portion of the hearing. I am required by the city's land use code to issue a written decision within 10 business days of the hearing this evening. And with that, again, Clark, thanks for having this slide prepared. I appreciate it, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Sure, thanks. Again, I'll be brief because I think the applicants might explain everything about the project, but here we are with the location. I didn't label here. I see on the left-hand side, that's North College Avenue, just north of downtown, just north of the Poudre River, between Vine Drive and the relatively new Suniga Road. Zoning, here's the property here. Again, Vine, North College, Jerome. Zoning is mostly community commercial. North College, CCN, is that zone district. The applicants purchased a property here that's really beneficial to their project and also beneficial to the city, that somebody purchased that and is now developing that. That's a whole other story. It's a piece of property behind an existing pawn shop here. So the North College strip is a kind of a commercial highway strip, and that's zone CS. Service commercial, you see the CS here, that carries down into a little bit of the western portion of the site. But what really is relevant as far as zoning is the CCN zone, which was originally written and envisions this kind of transitional development, transitional intensity, transitional density between the commercial strip and lower density subdivisions and neighborhoods beyond. And I think I will leave it at that and let the applicants present their project.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mapes, for that overview. Sam, I believe you'll be leading the applicant team discussion. So I will turn it over to Sam Coots with Ripley Design. Sam, if you do have other members of the team that will be providing comments, we can have those individuals introduce themselves at the appropriate time, and I'll make sure I've got their names and contact information as part of the record here. And actually, before we get going, I know I did see an email that you had sent to Clark before the hearing started tonight that contained a Dropbox link where you were requesting certain documents be incorporated as part of the record of the hearing tonight. I will just note that I have received all of the documents that are listed as attachments in section 7 of the staff report. That's on page 21 of 21. But if you'd like to go through the list of documents that you sent, if there's anything in particular that you think would be important to be incorporated into the record, I'm happy to entertain that request.
Sure. I think that the attachments in the staff report were mostly there. There were a couple that I want to make sure we did get. There was a letter of intent that was included in that Dropbox link, as well as I think the architecture package. I'm not positive if the one that was on the staff report was having trouble loading on your end, but it was on my end. So I had re-uploaded the architecture package to make sure that comes through okay on your end. Other than that, I think it was just filling in the missing blanks on some applications and just making sure that we've got a full record for you of everything on the development review checklist.
Okay, I do have a document that's titled architecture _ Jerome Street Station _ PDP _ for hearing. So that has been received. What is the title of the file that contains the letter of intent?
It is just letter of intent. It's a PDF.
Letter of intent. Okay, great. I will make sure that I have that as well. And
Great.
that will be part of the document package that I will review following the conclusion of the hearing tonight. So thank you for that. All right, go ahead. I'll turn it over to you, and we'll get going with the applicant presentation.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can you see the screen there?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Again, so my name is Sam Coots with Ripley Design. I'm a land planner and landscape architect, and I'm representing the applicant's Black Timberland Company for the Jerome Street Townhomes. As Clark mentioned, here is the roughly 7-acre site. Really just wanted to highlight, as Clark did, the split in the zone districts here. We'll talk about that a little later. To kickstart, just to bring you up to speed on a little bit of history here at Old Town North. This parcel was originally conceptualized as part of the Old Town North Overall Development Plan, ODP, and highlighted here in red is Parcel B. The majority of our site lies within that Parcel B boundary, and Parcel B allows for all uses within the CCN zoning district. It doesn't place any kinds of use restrictions other than that, or density restrictions otherwise. It does plan for 1.83 acres of open space and defines a 50-foot natural buffer on the southern end of the property. Additionally, it master plans some connections here from Jerome Street, east-west connections for vehicular movement. More history on the project. You'll notice as you review the project that it started in 2020 with the same PDP number that talks about a multifamily project. Just wanted to bring this up to show where we started. So in 2020, we submitted the original PDP with 3 multifamily buildings and a small 3,000 square foot commercial space. This had one full round of review under PDP and a neighborhood meeting associated with it. It was a 4-story product and about 2 acres of open space. Through that process, we've learned a lot since then in the last couple of years. And we heard in that neighborhood meeting some concerns about density and height, along with just changing market conditions and some technical issues that we were running into with this project. We have since pivoted and are now presenting a single family attached concept here tonight, which is before you. So this is the current site plan. There are 66 dwelling units in 12 different single family attached buildings for a total density of 9.25 DU per acre. The buildings are oriented around the perimeter of the site along Jerome Street in Suniga, and then on the southern end along Lake Canal and a major walkway spine that defines the western boundary. We'll talk about that a little more later. Each building is rear loaded through either a public or private alley and are all fronting either the major walkway spine or a road. The project proposes 3.29 acres of open space, so well above the open space that was originally envisioned in the ODP. And there are 160 parking spaces provided. Most of those come through the 2-car garages that each unit will have. There are 25 surface parking spaces scattered through the site, some here on the north end with building 1, some here between building 6 and 9, and then just north of building 10 as well. There are only 132 required, so we're well over the requirement, and that does not include on-street parking on Jerome Street here. Connectivity has been an issue really at the forefront of this design, so I wanted to take a little time on that with this slide. The 2 main points of access for the development will be off of Jerome Street, one to the north here, there's an existing stub on Jerome Street for Cahaton to be extended, as well as one on the southern end for Pascal Street. Starting with Cahaton, it's a private street stub that feeds into a private alley that will run north-south to load those rear loaded, alley loaded buildings. The public alley is dedicated along the southern end. This is a public dedicated right-of-way that creates as an extension of Pascal Street. And this is a public alley. It is a modified public street section, which is shown here on the left. And the purpose of this is really to be something in between an alley and a street. It's an alley, and the fact that we are rear loading garages, it'll feel and act as an alley. But it acts more as a pedestrian street that also contains vehicular movement. And this is something that we've worked extensively with city staff, both engineering and planning, to come up with how do we create this meaningful connection between Jerome and College Ave that the original ODP kind of saw as important in this area. So that is the one piece of public right-of-way dedication on the site. From a pedestrian standpoint, the major thoroughfares for pedestrians are these major walkway spines you see in purple. So along the western boundary, we have buildings 2, 4, 6, and 9, all oriented along this major walkway spine, as well as buildings 10, 11, and 12 that have a major walkway spine along the southern boundary. And those do act as pedestrian streets that gain access to the units to Jerome Street or Suniga. Other than that, there's a series of connecting walks that provide that east-west movement onto Jerome Street. You see in orange here. Outside of on-street circulation, this project does complete a connection for a public trail system. There's existing public trail to the east in Old Town North, dashed in red here. And then it today dead ends into Jerome Street. We'll be continuing that along the southeastern portion of our property. And then the Powerhouse 2 recently approved this development here, connects all the way down to the new Whitewater Park here off of Vine. Really quickly wanted to touch on this. This is kind of the only really important piece of knowing the split zoning between the CCN and the CS, is that this parcel, as we know, is the CS. And the only limiting factor there from a design standard standpoint is that the single family attached use is not allowed within 200 feet of the College Avenue right away. So this is that setback, the 200 feet off of College, showing that we're outside of that as an allowable use. There is the natural habitat zone buffer on the southern end of the side. You'll see here in red the requirement for the natural habitat buffer zone. That is a 50-foot buffer off of the top of slope for the Lake Canal, as well as any natural features found. There's one grove of trees that counts towards that, which creates this bubble in the middle here. On the bottom of the screen is the green is the provided natural habitat buffer zone. That represents a 29% increase over that minimum requirement. To speak to architecture, I want to start with the main piece of architectural inspiration, which is the Powerhouse directly south of this, and now the most recently approved Powerhouse 2 property. This is the existing Powerhouse 1, I guess. So notice the step back, lots of brick, gridded windows, mullions, and those iconic steam stacks there. The architecture here has taken a lot of those design cues, and the big idea also ties back some of the industrial heritage of the North College corridor. That's represented in the materials. Again, we see a very pedestrian-oriented brick base with a stucco middle, and then again carrying the brick up to this half story that is a walkout rooftop patio. So these are 2.5-story buildings. The top is just a stairwell to the patio space above. The buildings have been broken down to mimic similar proportions of other single-family attached and single-family detached homes throughout Old Town North, and creating these individualized units and helping create separation and scale to these. As I go through architecture, I'll talk about the 3 different building models we have, which are shown here, and then some building types. And the key is when I talk to building models, that's really talking about the design style. So you see here that the darker gray, the normal brick color, and then the white. These are 3 different styles and building models. Within each of those, there's a variety of 4, 5, 6, or 7 plex units that all change in shape and size of footprint, which we'll go into. Altogether, there are 8 different building types out of the 12 buildings on site. So there's a lot of variety here. As seen in this graphic, the land use code talks to not having 2 similar buildings placed next to each other on a site. This just really demonstrates how far away we are from doing that. There's a lot of variety between the 8 different building types, none of which are next to each other along a street as the code determines. There's also a requirement for variation among the buildings themselves. So this is where we get into the building models and types. And you'll see how between the 3 models, we have very distinct 3 different styles. And within those, there are further distinctions between say a 4, 5, 6, or 7 plex footprint in size and shape. Furthermore, within these building designs, you'll see different architectural details such as individualized entrances with either a gable, shed, or flat roof canopy. You'll see different architectural details such as window lintels and just how railings are picked up. So the key here is looking at an overall coordinated theme, but still varied and different. There are 2 modifications proposed with this application. The first deals with the relationship of dwellings to streets, and that impacts 3 buildings on site. 6 and 10 are located along major walkway spines, which is allowed. However, they are further than 350 feet away from the nearest public street. And then building 9 here in the middle fronts onto a connecting walkway. However, that connecting walkway bends around a building and crosses a private alley, which is not allowed by code. So in lieu, it has been faced towards open space. It's been determined that this modification would not be a detriment to the public good. The main finding here is that the intent of this standard is to create a strong pedestrian framework and not have any sacrifice in connectivity, which I think was apparent through our connectivity diagram earlier. Furthermore, it doesn't create any unsafe condition for residents or the public, and there are no other codes that are or standards that are violated by this modification. In order to prove the modification, we've determined that this application promotes the intent and the purpose of the standard equally well or better than a plan that which complies. And the purpose of this standard specifically is to promote variety, visual interest, and pedestrian-oriented streets in residential development. This is an example of that major walkway spine on the western side, and showing the level of detail of which these are designed to. It still meets all the definitions of a major walkway spine in width and character, clear sight lines, and tree-lined walk. Then it goes above and beyond and introduces articulated shrub beds, fencing, pedestrian level details such as walls and benches, nice handrails, and then enhanced paving to really up that visual interest through these corridors. As seen here, this is a quick sketch showing what that would feel like walking through that pedestrian spine, that major walkway spine. So you'll see the articulated path, different paving styles, detailed handrails, walls, all of that. This is something that promotes that visual interest equally well or better than a standard that complies. The second modification reflects the street facing facade standard. This standard says that every building shall have at least one doorway or entry facing an adjacent street that is smaller than a full arterial. So there are 2 units on this plan where this does not comply, and that's building 1 and 12 on the east side facing Jerome Street. This has also been determined not to be a detriment to the public good. The key thing here is that the side elevations have a lot of extra articulation and fenestration, and the level of the visual interest of these side elevations, not something that is a detriment to the public. As well as this is exactly what the code does not want, is a blank wall, no windows, no doorways, maybe some meter banks. This is the antithesis of what the code is after. Ironically, if you put a doorway onto this facade, then it could meet code. In lieu, we've presented these 2 as our side elevations for those building 1 and 12, which you see a lot of extra windows, articulations in roof and massing. Even downspouts have been used to create a rhythm across those facades. This absolutely promotes that variety and visual interest purpose of the code equally well or better than one that complies. Furthermore, if that one doesn't meet the criteria, we do find that it's nominal and inconsequential to the overall plan, being it's only 2 of the 66 units. So I think for now, I will stay there. We have lots of backup exhibits and graphics and our whole team here to answer any questions you might have.
Great, Sam. I appreciate that. The amount of visual detail that you had in the presentation was very helpful with the graphics in terms of understanding the 2 modifications of standard that are requested as part of the application. At this point, let's move over to the staff's application, and Clark, if you'd like to pull up your PowerPoint presentation, I'll turn it over to you, and then I'll hold any questions until after the conclusion of staff's presentation, or perhaps until after conclusion of public comment.
Thanks. As I thought, the applicant's presentation really covered the main issues very, very well. I included a little bit more background on how the Old Town North area even came to be, starting back in 1995, the first ever North College Corridor Plan. The site that we're talking about is generally here. There was no Jerome Street, there was no Suniga Road. This wasn't what turned out to sort of be Pascal. So anyway, just a lot of background, but I will say that this plan envisioned this area developing in a sort of a downtown related, lower downtown, semi-industrial, contemporary semi-industrial, mixed neighborhood, transitional again between the commercial strip and more just residential neighborhoods away from it. 1995 there, and then skipping to 2002 with Old Town North, the original vision and development concept for this property, which was floodplain. The developer had to fill this property, and developer installed this street and block pattern, this infrastructure, all the utilities, finished that work up in about 2007. And if you think about that, that's a whole other story. The recession started in 2008. That's a whole other story. That's got nothing to do with this. There was an overall development plan done that followed the sort of illustrative plan. There was a 2006 update of the North College Corridor Plan update. Again, shows the site is down here, this yellow asterisk. And again, you can see the idea of additional street connectivity, and it's reinforced the sort of recommended preferred theme and design approach as a contemporary semi-industrial kind of a style for buildings, more connectivity. That's the plan. Just briefly, the staff report explains how all of the general development standards for this project, that's Article 3 of the Land Use Code, applies to all development citywide. All these conventional topics that almost every plan has, these were all met pretty easily and pretty early on, subject to technical adjustments through multiple iterations. So there's not much to even present on the bulk of the site planning issues. The modification for the relationship of dwellings to streets, staff also, finds that would not be detrimental to the public good and is equal to or better than, and also there's an undue physical hardship. These are the buildings that you just saw in the applicant's presentation. And the reason for staff's findings are that, first of all, part of the intent of that is for neighborhood streets to have the faces of buildings along them and not parking lots and not blank walls. And so this plan very well covers that. It calls for a framework of space that buildings fit into. And in this case, that includes Pascal and Cahaton extensions, but just the basic idea that there are tendencies sometimes for a development to have a building product that they want to place them on a site. There is something in the industry that gets sort of talked about. It's the sort of train wreck where a bunch of buildings are placed onto a piece of property to sort of maximize, and then go back later and in between there, try to fit streets and or walkways and of course parking lots. But as opposed to establishing a clear, legible framework of public space. Sam mentioned this. The physical hardship aspect of it. The strip along Jerome, the property along Jerome is narrow. And also the southern part, by the time the Lake Canal, by the way, is the southern boundary of this site. It's the riparian forest, large mature trees, and has a natural habitat buffer zone. By the time the buffer zone is protected, the east-west area of property along the south part is very narrow and has to do with whether it would have been possible to interject more streets for buildings to face onto. So that's part of the physical hardship finding that staff made. Extending Pascal and Cahaton per se as streets is sort of hindered, if not precluded, by existing development on the west. That's again a whole other story that dates back to the original North College Corridor Plan, which at that time there was some expectation that North College, the strip along North College, might start to be assembled and significantly redeveloped. But a lot of those buildings have gained new life, reinvestment, and don't seem to be going away anytime soon. So anyway, that has to do with not extending streets per se into and through the property. Oh, and then the only way, the staff report explains that the only way for buildings 9 and 10 to comply with the standard, the letter of the law, so to speak, in terms of setting them along streets, would be to eliminate the buildings. There was no other way, and so that would be an undue hardship. Staff explains in the staff report. One way to think about it is to think about what kind of a plan could possibly meet the standard for all the dwellings to directly face a street or be sideways to a street. And another early iteration that was, just looked at for this property showed buildings along Jerome with parking behind and parking lots behind. And then Pascal extended as more of a street with buildings side loaded onto Pascal Street here and then facing Pascal here. Even this wouldn't meet all of the standards because this building here would have needed to have its garages facing Pascal. And if Pascal was considered a street per se, then there's a garage door limitation for streets. So anyway, there have been multiple iterations over a couple of years looked at, but that's to understand what it would take And instead of doing one row of buildings along Jerome, the current plan proposes 2 rows of buildings, some of which have to face west, given the internal alley with garages. And so that's that major walkway spine that really does form a framework all the way up and down the west here. And then within this relatively equally narrow area available for development here, Pascal was a very specially tailored, carefully wrought solution, unique, one-of-a-kind situation to get some kind of connection through there. That was more detail on Pascal and Cahaton. You've seen this. That's the modification for the street-facing facades. It looks like that's it. Staff's recommendation is approval of the 2 modifications of standards for the kind of the orientation to a street sidewalk connecting walkway. That's 352D1. And then the facade standard for the ends of buildings, the sides of buildings, is D2, and staff recommends approval. And all right, I'll stop sharing and see if if there are any questions.
All right, thank you, Cleric. I appreciate that. Let's move into the public comment portion of the hearing. I'm just curious to know if we have folks from the neighborhood that are with us here tonight to ask questions or provide any comment on this project. Katie, I'll look to you to help with that. Or do we have any members of the public that have their hands raised at this point? And again, for those of you that are participating via Zoom, there's a raise hand function at the bottom of the screen. And for those of you that may be calling in, *9 is what you would like to do to identify yourself to city staff.
I am not seeing any hands raised at this time.
Okay, so I'll just let the record reflect.
I
that-
do have one hand that just popped up.
Great, thank you, Katie. So I'm
Sure.
going to open the public comment portion of the hearing at 7:47 p.m.
This first speaker is, I apologize if I mispronounce your name, Rianne. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hello, it's Ryan Camp McCormick. Hi, we're at 802 Jerome. We're just across from the proposed development. I just have 2 questions. One being about the, you talked a bit about the extension of the trail going down towards the river. We're wondering if that means that we're going to get a pedestrian crossing at Jerome and Vine. And then the second question was regarding the floodplain. We're in kind of a serious situation here with the floodplain next to the Whitewater Park. Wondering if this development makes any kind of changes to that for us. That is
Okay.
it.
Yeah, Ryan, thank you for those questions. Before we provide the applicant or city staff to help answer those, I just want to make sure that we don't have any other members of the public that would like to ask questions or have comments at this point. So, Katie, do we have anybody else that is in the queue?
I am not seeing any additional hands raised.
Okay. I will go ahead and close the public comment portion of the hearing at 7:49 p.m. And Sam, maybe I'll turn it back over to you at this point, to you and the applicant team, if you'd like to address the questions that Ryan Kent McCormick just raised.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. I think we'll have Andy Reese, our civil engineer at Northern Engineering, jump on for those two questions.
Great, thank you, Sam.
Good evening. As Sam mentioned, my name is Andy Reese with Northern Engineering. Regarding the Jerome and Vine crossing, that's not a part of this project. However, it is being included as a part of the Powerhouse 2 project. That's where you're going to see those improvements happening. We're currently working with the city to kind of figure out the exact configuration, but that is on the docket as a part of that other project. Regarding the question about the floodplain, the work that's happening right now is fully taking into account the floodplain, and we're complying with the city requirements to show no rise as a part of our project. So that essentially, says that the improvements we're doing are not going to adversely affect any upstream or downstream properties. That being said, there's not anything in our plans or in the current modeling that would change the floodplain limits or improve the floodplain limits. Those will continue to kind of be where they are today. So not any worse, but also not any better as a result of this project.
Thank you, Andy. Clark, do you have anything you'd like to add there?
I would like to see if Steve Gilchrist, our traffic engineer, has anything to add about the Vine crossing that was also very carefully wrought in the Powerhouse 2 project. Or Steve, did Andy cover it just completely?
He pretty much covered it. We are working right now on design. We're working with Powerhouse 2 and the city's active modes plan to initiate that crossing and determine the exact funding and those things. So it's one that it's in progress. It is coming hopefully in the near future, and we'll get some type of enhanced crossing there. It sounds more like an RFB type system that will have a pedestrian actuated signal that will hopefully get folks across there safely to the Whitewater Park.
Thank you, Steve. Are there any specific, I will definitely review the staff report in detail as I'm taking everything into consideration here, but are there any off-site traffic improvements that are being required as part of this infill development?
Not that I'm aware of. It's more adjacent frontages. One of the things that the Powerhouse 2 with that trail extension, they are providing a widened path across their thing, but it wasn't required of the Jerome Street Station project. So the other thing is that connection to College Avenue. That's one that we're looking internally within the city to provide some type of connectivity out to College. So that's really that pedestrian piece that allows that connectivity to that retail and those services along College Avenue.
You're talking about Pascal?
Pascal.
Yeah, okay. So moving west from the property boundary toward College, okay. And that would require some acquisition of property interest then, right?
I can't remember if it's an actual existing easement or not. Tim might be able to speak to that, but yeah, it's one that we wanted them to definitely connect into that. And then also even in the future, there was actually supposed to be 2 connections to College, one further to the north. And I think we're looking to provide at least a pedestrian connection further to the north as well, if any of those properties on that west side develop. But I think with Pascal, we had that access in that alley existing. That's where we went with that connection to start with.
I can provide a little more background if you'd like on that. Just with the connection to Pascal at North College Avenue, this project is not acquiring any right-of-way or property over there. They have a letter of intent from the property owner, and that property owner will improve that driveway access to be usable, essentially.
Okay, thank you, Tim. And then at some point, though, you're saying there would be potentially north of Pascal, but south of Suniga, there'd be at some point looking at potentially doing another pedestrian access that would move west out toward College. That's in kind of a longer term goal.
Yes, it was discussed that Caheaton Street would possibly make that connection eventually, but that's not really established as of right now. It's a future consideration.
Okay. And then for the entire circulation plan that's proposed in this PDP, I'm assuming that this has been reviewed and signed off on by Poudre Fire Authority at this point.
Poudre Fire Authority was included in all stages of the review, and they've approved it enough to get to this point at least.
There is something else I would say about Cahaton, if I can.
Go ahead, Clark. Yep.
I skipped over this. I had this slide in there. But Cahaton Street in Old Town North is here. It currently comes to Jerome. And then actually the west side of Jerome was built with curb returns where Cahaton was to be extended. Again, staff and the applicants looked thoroughly at all possibilities for how this could possibly continue over to College as a street. It actually would require removal of the development to the west on one or two properties, would sort of take property away from those properties, which would make redevelopment even more unlikely, if you follow that. So anyway, just through all the iterations, it ends up with this space, which is the equivalent of extending Cahaton Street as a public space, and the sidewalks on Cahaton continue across straight as if there was a street here in the middle, but instead it's just open space, and there will be an access easement stubbed to the property line, which is what Steve referred to, that in the future, if anything happens over here that triggers development, they'll be required to extend those public access easements. I thought that took some iterations to get to that point. And then as far as the Pascal situation, anyway, there's an existing alley, I'll stop sharing, on the, it actually runs along the north edge of a pawn shop that's there, but it's an existing access easement. So this property will extend a public right-of-way for sort of an alley-like feature that will tie into that access easement. Someday maybe it'll become right-of-way, but that's already there.
Okay, thank you, Clark. And just to confirm, staff is recommending approval of this project and recommendation of approval of the two modifications of standard, correct? Both the relationship to streets and the street facing facades, right? Staff is
right
satisfied that those are okay.
And the facade modification is pretty simple to get your head around. The staff report has a couple of pages on the public space framework in lieu of a street and block network that you can read at your leisure in detail, but it's all been pretty well presented here tonight. But okay, yes, recommending approval, yes, with no conditions or anything.
Great, and I'm not sure, I did send a request to I'm not sure I have a copy of Sam, the applicant's PowerPoint yet. But you know, granted, I did not have a chance to check all of my emails this afternoon. So if that's already been sent, then please ignore that request. But if it's possible to get a like a PDF version of that report for my file and to have the opportunity to review that in a little bit more detail, I would appreciate it.
Absolutely, I'll get it sent over. I
appreciate that. So I don't have further questions at this point. I'd like to thank Sam, Ripley Design, and the rest of the team that's on the hearing tonight, representing Black Timber Land Company. Appreciate it. Clark, thank you very much for your work on the staff report and also for some of that historical overview. Regarding this North College area, that's just some good background information for me to have. I appreciate that. And then finally, thank you also to Ryan, Ken McCormick for taking time out of your Wednesday evening to be with us tonight. So again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the hearing, I am required to provide a written findings and a decision within 10 business days of the conclusion of the hearing. So that will be distributed in accordance with the land use code requirements. So I will close the public hearing on this
Sir,
project.
Marcus, excuse me. I'm sorry. I just said staff recommends approval with no conditions. When you read the staff report, you will see that I threw in late in the process, I added in the recommendation that there's one condition of approval. I wasn't sure that this even needs to be a condition because it typically happens anyway, and we would have insisted on this in final plan. But where I just showed you the Cahaton Street extension and those two sidewalks, and I said that a public access easement will be stubbed to the property lines on the west side. If we could just have the applicants agree right now that there's no problem doing that on the plat, in the final plan, final plat, to just dedicate a public access easement that extends to the property line. It's something we did. In fact, Ripley Design did this at Local, which was called Scott Plaza on Westwood. It's the same kind of thing. No issue, I don't think. Sam, is there any?
Nope. Yeah, Clark, I think we had discussed that offline, and we're all okay with that. So we'll make sure it gets on the plat in the final.
Issue, no problem. So to Marcus, I would say, never mind the recommendation of a condition of approval for that. That was one of the last days that before I sent this to you, and there's no need to officially do any condition. It's just going to happen. So thank you.
Okay, I am seeing that now on page 21 of the report.
And if I can say here in the hearing on the record, never mind. It's going to happen, but we don't need a condition in your decision.
Okay, let me just make a quick note of that. Thank you, Clark. I appreciate that. So I will, again, I'll have the written decision issued within 10 business days of tonight's hearing. Thank you all for participating. I'll close the public hearing at 8:02 p.m. So the time is 8:06 p.m. Let's go ahead and open the public hearing on the third of three hearings this evening. This is PDP 210016. Sit and Stay Dog Bar, and I believe, Mr. Mapes, this is your project as well. You want to give us a quick overview?
Yes, hello. Thank you. In fact, it's me. It's the same me, and it's the same planning firm that's going to be presenting. Different staff member from them, but same firm. I will share my screen. So, Sit and Stay Dog Bar. This will be the first in the city. And I don't know if there's anybody here. Katie, are there any public citizens here?
I do see a few on the call, yes.
Marcus, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm definitely, because we may have some folks that dialed in later knowing that this was the third hearing. So let me run through this. Thank you, Clark, for having this slide available. So for members of the public that are participating tonight or attending this hearing virtually, when we get to the public comment portion of the hearing, which will come after the applicant and staff have had an opportunity to present the project, then if you would like to ask questions, or if you have input on the project that you think is important for me to take into consideration when I am completing my review of the materials and issuing a decision, then please use the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen in Zoom, or if you're dialing in, please dial *9. At that point, city staff will see that you have comments, and we'll get you in the queue to participate in the public comment portion of the hearing. And Clark, if you'd like to advance to the next slide, I can do a short overview of the order of proceedings. So as I just mentioned, Mr. Mapes will give a very brief introduction. We'll turn it over to the applicant team for a presentation on the project. Mr. Mapes will then give a more in-depth staff presentation. At that point, we will open it up to public comment. And then the applicant and staff will both have an opportunity to answer questions or provide additional input in response to the issues that are raised during public comment. I am required by the Land Use Code to submit a written decision within 10 business days at the conclusion of the hearing. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Clark. And let me just quickly note for those members of the public that may have joined a little bit later that I did note at the beginning of the consolidated public hearing tonight on these three projects that all public notice was provided regarding this project. Specifically, mail notice was provided on November 15th. Notice of tonight's hearing was published in the Fort Collins, Coloradoan on November 18th. So I do have jurisdiction to hear this matter tonight. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Clark.
All right, thanks. Again, to the applicants, let me give you a heads up that this is very brief. And in fact, later after your presentation, when it comes to staff analysis and further presentation, I don't have much on this. We're at North College Avenue, a little ways up the street from the previous project. There's a shopping center here at the corner of North College Avenue and Willocks Lane. 1990s shopping center, country club corners. The property is just essentially a pad site within that shopping center area. It's now considered a lot within the Country Club Corners Shopping Center. It's the last parcel available for development. You do see land here. This is a detention pond, and another story, not for this, but it's possible that in the future this could someday be developed with some downstream stormwater drainage pipe work. But essentially the last available parcel within a finished shopping center, which made it fairly straightforward and simple. Zoning, it's just embedded well within the service commercial zoning district that we actually discussed on the previous project. It's a wide-ranging zone district, allows all kinds of commercial, residential, some semi-industrial, some light industrial type uses, and all of the uses proposed here, dog kennel, dog daycare, restaurant bar, are well within the zoning, scope of the zoning. That's all I'm going to say at this point, and we can see what the applicants would like to present.
Thank you, Clark. So Russell Lee with Ripley Design. And just want to make sure that I can, everybody sees my screen okay? So, yep. So I'm here representing the team. You can see the members on the team here, and we'll be available for questions in the end. We are presenting the Sit and Stay Dog Park Type 1 hearing on this date, November 30th. Just a little overview on what this is. It's fairly unique. It's a dining, it's a place to eat. It's a place to recreate with your dogs. It's a place to bring your dog when you can't take care of your dog. It's a place to rent, to utilize for parties. It's going to have a restaurant, and it's this really unique feature that is great with its proximity to Old Town and the neighboring areas around it. Something similar is, and probably fairly well known, is Bark in Kansas City. It was one of the first major one of these types of uses. I won't go into this much, other than Clark did a good job of stating where the site is, and we're kind of centered here. It's the existing commercial area. And then similar side to what Clark had, we're in the middle, we're smack dab in the middle of the CS zone district. One thing I did want to point out is we are flanked by 2 private drives. So that's how we're accessing the site. So when you look at the site in more detail, that's where we are coming off of Bristlecone into these private drives here. And then here's our site. So the building really has 2 uses in it. It's got a doggy daycare area to the north, and north being to the right. And then it's got a restaurant area to the south. And this is our main entrance. Patrons would come in here and they would check their dogs in, release them into the unleashed zone and or check them into doggy daycare, and then proceed over to the restaurant to enjoy socializing with humans and dogs at the same time. We will, within the open space, there's going to be another bar area, refreshment area here, as well as a covered stage for events and or entertainment. Service entrance will be on the east side of the building as well. And the one thing I wanted to point out, you know, with the nature of this site, we're blessed with 44% open space, which is great. You know, they will have be able to block off areas for private dog parties. Again, access to the site is through these private drives, and then we will be continuing the walk that already exists in front of this commercial center. It'll carry through and then connect back into the existing walk system here as well. As far as parking goes, we have 92 vehicles we can park. 60 vehicles were required, but we were able to get 92 on the site, which we thought was great. And then a large bike parking area here that exceeds the standards as well. We have David Karen with VFLA. I'm going to let him kind of hop on and discuss the architecture.
Thank you, Russ. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes.
I can hear you just fine, David.
All right, thank you. So the building has undergone a few iterations through the process, resulting in the building we have now. If you go back to the site plan real quick, Russ, one thing we really wanted to maintain, and is while we don't have streets, to maintain some of the consistent language in the land use code for the architecture, is he wanted to align with the adjacent building property to maintain a constant sort of a street front look, which then begins to peel away to create a very large plaza park. And while we're still kind of keeping the corners of our property accented with the stage and the bar accessory structures. So that's how the current project has formed. And then if you go back to the elevation slide, previous one. So what we wanted to do is, at one point, this was a 2-story project, but then we turned it back to a 1-story project, but we wanted to maintain that 2-story height. And that entrance, which is what you see there, is kind of that brown beige stucco with the signage. You know, we wanted to really have that presence, you know, from college, since this is a difficult site being so far recessed from any street. So we wanted to be able to have that presence, and having a double height entry feature right in the middle of the building. It's very well established on the site, really helps to drive the public to this project, and it's visible, and it would be more visible from college between the single story structures already existing on college, and the single story building respects existing scale. This is kind of the reverse side of the building. It's mostly utilitarian in nature. You see the overhead doors. That's how the dog daycare is going to have indoor outdoor play. And then on the north is what are dubbed the luxury boarding kennels. So they have indoor outdoor access as well within their own private kennel. And that's what faces the adjacent strip mall type building to the north of us.
That's looks nicer than my college accommodation.
So
one question I have, and this maybe for the applicant's team or staff. Is it, will the dogs actually be allowed inside the restaurant space? I mean, and the reason I ask is that I know in some other jurisdictions that became an issue from a health code perspective. I mean, is it that the dogs remain outside in the unleashed zone and are not actually present where the food service is occurring, or what's the business plan, I guess?
Yeah, so there's an extensive gating system associated with this. So yeah, the idea is no, the dogs will not be on the eating zone. So where people exit the patio, we have multiple gates, similar to what you would see at a dog park, just to keep dogs from escaping or getting where they're not supposed to. So there's a fairly elaborate fencing gating system associated with the project, just to ensure that stays separate.
And many of the same restrictions apply in Fort Collins. There is no dogs in food service areas per the health department, so that doesn't change here either.
Okay, great. I just wanted to confirm that.
Sure.
I don't want to be the one responsible for creating an issue, right?
Yeah. Well, and then I just, here's some, again, you kind of saw this 3D view of this is the main entrance, and what David had talked about, kind of popping the top here to get that entry feel, that entry presence. Here's a aerial view, so you can kind of see how everything's interacting. Here's here's all the fencing around everything, right? It's fairly, and this doesn't show the amount of detail, but you'd be surprised at how complicated it can be.
This is actually pretty early rendering too, because it's even changed a lot since then.
Yeah, but this gives you kind of a general idea of how it's all going to function. And then, that the patrons can be down here with their dogs. That is obviously encouraged.
Sure.
And this would be where the stage is. This is that adjacent retail. Like you said, we're trying to line up with to continue that architectural facade through there.
Okay, and that's all intended, I can review the landscaping plan in detail, but that's all natural grass that's
This is all artificial turf.
Oh, okay, great,
Yep.
because that was gonna be one of my questions, because
Yeah, so I should have mentioned
anytime
that.
you see any sort of dog park, it starts off with being landscaped.
Yeah,
There's
no,
the weeds and
exactly.
turns
No,
to
yep.
dirt.
So this will all be artificial. So it will have the green look, but it will be obviously designed to be maintained for a dog park. And then, we just wanted to point out where the architecture is meeting the land use code. We're matching, we're being compatible with the adjacent architecture. We're respecting the scale and materials. We do feel like we're consistent with the North College corridor plan, especially the architectural requirements in that. We're trying to build off the existing relationships. We're varying the massing to try to bring scale to the building, appropriate scale. We do have that really prominent entrance, clearly defined, coming right in. Very, very proud, large plaza to come in and out of as well. And lots of articulation in the building, both on the main side and the back side as well. Like Clark said, this is a lot. It's already in a commercial zone. It meets all of the standards of the land use code. And I just wanted to hit on some of the highlights of just the bigger picture stuff. This is in the urban mixed use place type within the structure plan, and that does promote restaurants. It also likes to have things close to transit, and there will be a future rapid transit stops. College Avenue will be a future rapid transit route. City plan principle LIV2 promotes infill development, which is exactly what we're doing. This is underutilized property. Obviously, it's been sitting there since the 90s, ready to be redeveloped. It's infill. And again, it's close to the transit stop. And I thought this was a great principle that's in the new city plan. Support local, unique, and creative businesses. That's what was the most exciting thing when Patrick, the applicant developer, came to talk to us about this. We all were super excited about it. It's just such a unique unique experience, a unique thing for this region, for the state even. And it's just a really fun project to have. And if it does get approved and get built, it will be a great thing to say, hey, I helped with this, or we all helped with this. So I just want to leave the note last that, the plan meets the land use code standards. No modifications or alternative compliance are required or requested. So with that, we'll open it up to comments.
Great, thank you, Russ. I appreciate that overview. So Clark, maybe I'll turn it back over to you. Do you have a staff presentation that you'd like to run through at this point? This would probably be a good opportunity for me just to disclose on the record that that I own 2 dogs, a Husky mix and an Aussie Doodle. But even though I own 2 dogs, I believe I can make a fair and impartial decision in this matter based upon the facts that are presented in the hearing tonight. And but anyway, I tend to agree, Russ, that it looks to be a pretty neat concept, pretty innovative, creative land use, pretty exciting. But Clark, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you. This is my analysis. Again, as I mentioned, because this is a pad site in a developed shopping center, already has the vehicular access. You see the parking and the walkways being added, which will actually, the walkways and landscaping will actually set an enhanced standard of quality in this shopping center. I believe, I don't have the staff report in front of me. I may have mentioned the architectural materials, and I may have mentioned, I thought that some of what is lap siding was metal. So if you see the listing of materials and you see metal in the staff report, if you do see that, I see that that's not right, but it doesn't matter. The materials are fine, the building architecture is fine, and so on, as has been presented. I was going to suggest one condition, and that is that this somehow include a space where I and others, I can bring my cat and others can bring their cats, where they can safely sit there and watch the dogs acting ridiculous. But with that condition, this is, unless there are questions, there's nothing else really to analyze under the land use code. I better stop.
Okay, Clark, I thank you for that. Katie, let's go ahead and open this up for public comment, and thank you to members of the public that have stayed with us through 3 hearings tonight. It's 8:26 p.m. I'll open the public comment portion of the hearing on PDP 210016.
Sure. So far, we have 1 hand raised. So I'm going to allow Tess Jones to speak. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tess Jones. I'm a resident here in North Fort Collins. I personally do have 2 dogs and love this idea. I will say that Fort Collins needs more dog boarding options. So I do like that this one has a mixture of both indoor and outdoor dog areas, as well as live music and events. It sounds like a really cool place for dog owners to get together with community and also have their dogs explore the parks. So I do really like this idea.
Tess, can I grab your address for the record?
Yeah, it's 1212 Raintree Drive, Fort Collins, 80526.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Katie, do we have anybody else that is signed up or has their hand raised?
Yes. Next up is Courtney. Courtney, you should be able to unmute yourself if you could state your name and address for the record.
Hi, yeah, my name is Courtney. I live here in Fort Collins at 1118 Ridgelong Drive. I just wanted to chime in because I saw this article about Sit and Stay Dog Bar, and I was really thrilled to hear that such a unique and exciting place could be coming up in Fort Collins. And one of the things that I love about Fort Collins is how dog friendly it is. And a dog bar where I could get together with my friends while also letting my dog run around and socialize would accent a dog lover's values like mine greatly.
Okay. Next up, we have Melinda Smith. Melinda, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi there. My name is Melinda Smith. I'm a resident in North Fort Collins. I've lived here for a long time and I'm a dog owner, and I'm just really excited about this idea. It's very unique and not like anything else that we have in Fort Collins. So I just wanted to drop a note expressing support for this project.
Can I grab your address for the record, Melinda?
Sure. It is 1118 Ridgelawn Drive, Fort Collins.
And I do not see any more hands raised at this time.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Let's go ahead and close the public comment portion of the hearing at 8:30 p.m. I did not, in those comments that were offered, hear any concerns or questions per se, but if the applicant's team or city staff would like to provide any additional comment or final any final comments whatsoever for my consideration, now would be the time.
I think we're pretty good.
Okay, thank you, Russ. Mr. Mapes, anything from city staff?
Thank you. Thank you. Nope.
Okay, well, thank you all for your patience this evening and for being the third out of 3 hearings this evening. As I mentioned at the beginning, when we were going through the order of proceedings, I am required to issue a written decision within 10 business days of the conclusion of tonight's hearing. So thank you all for your participation. I will close the public hearing on this matter officially at 8:31 p.m. And I hope everybody has a good rest of your evening.